Hi, Graham from Cold Tool Centre. This is just a short, quick, to the point video on pressure switches and non-return valves. Most common item that we get asked about on repairing compressors. If somebody comes into me and wants to buy a pressure switch, the first thing I say, well, what's the problem? And they say, oh, it's blowing air around the pressure switch. Need to replace it. So then you say, okay, the question is, when does it blow air? And then if they say, oh, it blows air all the time, or does it blow air when it finishes its cycle and it turns off? Instead of going, it keeps venting. This is the pressure switch. As you can see, it's got 4 inlets, one that goes into the compressor, one for the safety valve, one for the outlet, and one usually is used for the pressure gauge itself, which gives you a tank pressure. On coming out of here would be usually a regulator. On the regulator, that would be giving you regulated pressure, and then you would have outlets. This other one is your needle valve, which when it hits pressure, it will open and will vent the air that is going from the compressor pump to the tank, and that line will then be dropped out of here, so there's no pressure to start on. So instead of having 100 pound for it to try to start on, there should be none. So it should just go, and that should be it. If it keeps blowing air, you then have to go back and look at your non-return valve, which is at the other end of your piece of pipe. So this goes into the tank, that goes up to the pump, and internally in here we have the valve. Now if the valve is faulty, instead of the air just coming out of the delivery line, the air keeps coming back out of the tank and keeps bleeding down. So you'll have air which continues to blow out of there. You have to either reface this surface or replace the plug, check the surface inside is okay. Make sure that that moves in and out freely and it's not catching on the outside. If it's catching on, some are quite close. If it's catching on the outside, you might have to take a little bit off the outside of there as well. So that it moves in and out freely, the spring's nice and stretchy, and the surface is good. Then you can assemble that, and you should have no air once you've turned the compressor off. There should be no air continuing to come out of that side pipe. If it's really bad, you may have to replace it, but there are numerous ones of these, and if you have to replace one of these, you would have to take it in or bring it in as a sample so we can get you the right non-return valve. Now, if it's doing the other thing and it keeps it's running air all the time, what that can be is one of two things. This little needle valve here should go to about 20 pounds, and when it hits 20 pounds, you should find that it then turns off. So it'll vent till it hits about 20 pounds, then it should close until it goes right up to pressure. If that's not happening, the easy way to check that is to take your line off here, and if it keeps bleeding out of there, that's not the problem, because the air wouldn't be now coming out of, then air would be coming out of this pipe. So if it keeps bleeding out of there, the last thing you're checking, there's a rubber diaphragm in the bottom of here. That rubber diaphragm's gone. It will continue to leak all the time when it's turned off, when it's running, because the air is coming straight out and just leaking past the rubber diaphragm. In that case, you do need to replace your pressure switch. If it's leaking on this needle valve, you can sometimes get the needle valve, but often you will have to replace the pressure switch because you can't buy the needle valve separate. So if the diaphragm's gone, a new pressure switch, needle valve's gone, probably a new pressure switch. You may have a combination. Now you could have this problem and a busted diaphragm. So you have to fix one thing at a time and work your way through it. There's two other things that you have to look at. If the compressor keeps running and on your gauge here, it's showing that it is keeping increasing in pressure. It'll go to 100 psi or 130 psi. Then the safety valve goes off. You've got a faulty pressure switch because it's not turning it off. But if you look at your gauge and the gauge isn't go over 60 or 80 psi, that indicates you've got a problem with the pump itself on your compressor. So the pump is not pumping, which would normally mean that either the gaskets are gone or the reeds or the valves in the compressor are gone. If your pressure switch doesn't reach pressure, it will not be able to turn off. So if your pressure never goes over 60 or 80 psi, the pump will just continue to run and run and run until you turn it off manually, because it will not turn off until it reaches pressure. Hope that was helpful. Thanks very much.